Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We have a very special guest today, Mr. Jeff Tucker. Tell us about yourself.
Well, gosh.
Give me the long version.
Well, I'm a retired firefighter by trade. That was my first profession. Spent 10 years in operation, then 10 years as an arson bomb investigator. That was my first professional career. And outside of that, I've just kind of been a serial entrepreneur doing things I enjoy doing.
And what are you doing now?
Well, right now I'm doing a lot of development. I'm in a little town in central Texas called Brownwood. Took an old one of the oldest gun stores and hardware stores in Texas and converted it into a microbrewery. Created a Texas landmark out of this building. And it was built in 1888. Gun store was opened here in 1876 across the street. I've got a 12-story hotel next door to us that we're developing as well and turning it back into historic preservation. It was built in 1928.
Oh, wow.
So that's keeping me occupied right now.
And before we started recording, you said your hunting lodge there is kind of an homage to Mr. Teddy Roosevelt, who I believe was president.
Yeah, he's back over my shoulder here. Yeah, the name of our brew house. Yeah, name of our brew house is Teddy's Brew House, and I wrote a lot of papers about him when I was in college. Iconic figure. You talk about being a citizen. I think he was quite a citizen.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, just I mean, the national parks.
Sure.
A lot of the early conservation of public land was thanks to Teddy Roosevelt.
Correct.
So you said you began as a firefighter. You were a line firefighter, and then you became an investigator later. Or how'd that go?
Yeah, I mean, I got on the job when I was a kid. I was 19. Like I said, I became a firefighter there in Fort Worth, Texas. I spent almost 20 years on that profession, 10 years in operation on the line, and then got into arson bomb investigation. Went and did my EOD training out of Redstone Arsenal in Alabama, probably one of the premier bomb schools on the planet. And then we're FBI ATF trained as well for investigation and crime scene. And, we dealt with, I think my first year on the job, we had 4 live devices a month for the first year I was there. I got on the job, literally got out of bomb school about a week before Oklahoma happened. And then I literally retired about 2 weeks before 9/11. So I've had a full gamut there.
And since then, since you retired, you've been starting businesses and things like that, right?
Yeah. That profession really allowed me to have a lot of free time. We worked a 24-hour shift off 48, so I did everything from paint houses to build houses. I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur, and so I can't seem to sit still. And then, back in 2001, I retired from the job and started a company called GSX Athletics, where I think fire trucks are about to roll by. Sorry about the background noise.
Oh, no worries.
They're right down the street. Give me 1 second here.
Oh, we can't hear it.
Now they're playing the song. Yeah. But I started a company called GSX Athletics and bought 3 acres of land out there, built about a 12,000 square foot training facility for kids, adults. We did tumbling, gymnastics, taekwondo, ballet, youth sports training. About 7 months after we opened that, we opened up a CrossFit component for it. And then CrossFit came calling and they asked me to do their gymnastics seminars, and I developed that and did that for about 12 years.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about gymnastics and I guess jujitsu lately because I'm not the biggest NFL fan out there, but I do watch, and we have a sports show here. We do a lot of gambling as well. It's fun. We go to a lot of games and stuff. But what I've noticed is it seems like a lot of these players over this past like half generation or so, they don't know how to fall down properly. That seems kind of a weird thing to say, but like Tua Tagovailoa from Miami, every time he gets tackled, he goes stiff as a board and just, head impacts the
Right.
ground almost every time. And now he's had 3 concussions this year because of that stuff. And it seems like
Right.
getting kids involved in, tumbling and grappling when they're young is a really good idea because, you learn how to fall and get back up, but you learn how to take risk and you learn how to fucking put yourself at a little risk without really getting hurt. You know what I mean?
Right. And there's a kinesthetic awareness that develops uh, the more you do body weight training and body movement. But I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, gymnastics made me a better firefighter. That's what
Mhm.
I did as my sport when I was a younger man, and it still serves me today if I can keep my flexibility up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a lot of people, I don't know if you remember Daryl Strawberry. He was a
Yep.
big slugger back in the day. But sometime I think it was the late 80s or maybe the early 90s, he was having some balance and core issues. So he started taking ballet classes. And people talked a lot
Yep.
of shit, right? Because, like, you're a 6'4" giant athletic baseball player. What are you doing out there tiptoeing around?
Right.
But the point was that, right? It was to get better control of your body.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I've done ballet as a younger man too, and it's an ass whooping.
Mm.
I don't care what anybody says. Once you get that bar, those Russian instructors can wear you out. You find your limitations real quick.
Yeah, I bet. So one of the reasons we brought you here to talk today is about leadership, and I think there's a big gap in certainly in modern America, not just in America though. I think it's the entire West that we've gone in 2 generations from defeating the Nazis to not being able to hear things that upset us without being upset visibly. You know what I mean? And
Sure.
a big part of that I think is for me. This is my perspective. I'm not a parent, but I did take a lot of 17 to 19-year olds and turn them into men when I was in the army. Um,
Sure.
when you coddle people, when the child falls down and you rush over to see if they're okay instead of saying, "Hey, you're good, get up." You know what I mean? It's
Right.
I know there's a natural instinct, especially when you care for someone, to protect them, shield them from pain and discomfort and stuff like that. But you don't seem to be doing them any favors, especially early on, by doing that stuff. And we've kind of made that a matter of course at this point. That's just kind of the standard, is to, make sure everybody's feeling okay instead of making sure they're doing the right thing, I think, right? So I wonder what your thoughts are on that and kind of how things have digressed for America over the past couple of decades or so.
It's funny that the first time I went through rookie school, I was in the early 80s. And then when I went to get my training, I had to go through Fort Worth Police Academy because we had to have arresting powers. So I
Mhm.
basically got to be a rookie all over again after 10 years on the job.
Wait, so you had to
And one of the
do
things,
what's it called? Post A and B or something? Like police
uh,
officer safety, whatever the hell it is.
yeah, had to do that. I mean, I went through the whole gamut. I mean, I was
Wow.
there 6 months, part of
And
our
that was
training.
that was
So
to become an investigator after you had been a
a
firefighter for 10
firefighter.
years. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I had just turned 33 and got into the academy to get that training and said, "Hey, look, I could have sat in the back of the classroom and I said, look, I'll be one of the guys. I'll wear the gray khakis. I'll go running. We'll do the calisthenics, et cetera." But all that to say this, we got to where we were running, about 4 miles a day, 6 weeks in, and we were doing 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, and getting salty and starting to get some pleats in our khakis. And then they put us up against each other to box. We had to learn to box and grapple, et cetera. And I was amazed at how many people had never had the snot bubbles knocked out of them. I mean, just to take a punch.
Mhm.
And here we are, padded helmet, padded gloves, and they were afraid of it. That was kind of the first time I really felt like I saw it. It's not the era that I grew up in. I was born in the early 60s. And so, we kind of settled everything out on the playground and, shook hands, made up, moved on, or never talked to each other again. But it was certainly then I noticed there's a lot of people that were stepping into a profession that they were utterly unprepared for, both mentally and physically. And to see people step into, we had to fight 3 rounds with each other, and then we had to fight the last round with a professional boxer. Um, that was pretty telling, and I think you're absolutely right. We're looking at raising a generation of coddled and codified people. And what is it? What is the old saying? I probably won't quote it right, but hard times make for hard men,
Mm.
and soft times make for soft men. And I think we're definitely seeing that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's definitely an issue, but I'm not sure that the times have necessarily gotten softer. I think we're just treating people softer. Like it's still there are different that they're not we don't have the same challenges that people in the 60s, 70s and 80s had, but there are still challenges like being able to afford a home right now is a challenge, right? And the grit
Right.
and tenacity to say no to spending 7 to 10 bucks a day on coffee and saving that money, which by the way is 2500 to $3,000 a year you would save if you stopped doing that shit.
Right.
And investing in yourself and exercising austerity until you get to the place where you want to be. We want everything now. I don't think the challenges are certainly different, and in a kinesthetic sense or a physical sense, they probably are less than we used to have to deal with because of modern technology and stuff. But there's still plenty of challenges. We're just teaching kids now that they should expect results immediately, and that's just not how life works.
Yeah, and I think well, I would agree with most of it. I think it's certainly ingrained in our, even me. I mean, I can pick up a phone. I've got a computer, a camera, a social media platform, all in one. And I didn't have that as a kid. We were out riding bikes and playing till dark. And what I see today is like even with my own children, I've tried really hard to push them into a more strenuous life.
Mm,
Learning to ride a horse, learning to work cattle, learning to be out on the ranch, how to survive, how to hunt, how to fish, how to camp. But I do think one of my degrees is history. I've got a
mm,
master's in history from TCU, and one of the things that I always kind of push back when I hear that, I think there are challenging times, most certainly, and I think everything's relative. But just looking back through history, I mean, I don't even feel like in my youth it was a hard
mm,
time. Here we are coming out of the '60s, and basically what we have the Vietnam conflict and what was going on there. But when I look back at the '30s and '40s, what people like my grandfather and grandmother went through, they went through hard times.
right.
They knew hunger,
Mm,
and they used the FDR programs to work and have some form of payment and satisfaction of being able to be productive. I think today we tend to have maybe a different type of mental and physical stress,
mm.
but I don't think it's hard time compared to what we've seen in history. I think it's been a long time since this generation has had to dealt with what the greater generation had to deal with,
Sure,
in my
yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, I mean just from boomers forward, I feel like it's been pretty consistent. We've most of our I guess most of our afflictions are kind of self-created in a lot of ways.
Right,
Whereas
right,
it used to be existential threats we were dealing with like Nazis and famine. Now it's like,
right,
we're overworking ourselves or we're not doing the things we should be doing or whatever it is, right? It's
yeah,
different, but the thing I've learned about dealing with people that have post traumatic stress is whatever got you there doesn't necessarily matter, right? What matters is that you're there and that it's all relative to perspective, right? Like you're gonna feel like your situation is the worst because that's the one you're experiencing. So,
right,
we have to treat people in that way, but even then, it doesn't pay to treat anybody like they're a child. Even a child, it doesn't pay to treat them like a child. Like if you're trying to
right,
create a good person, a good human being who is a functional adult, not just for themselves, but for their family and their community, then you have to start treating that person as early as possible, right? You have to start priming them to be a good human being, be an adult, make tough decisions, like put themselves at
right.
risk sometimes for stuff that matters. And, you know, we seem to be raising kids without resiliency. I think my generation, the Gen X and older millennial generation, we were latchkey kids a lot. And I think we got
Mhm.
some of it just because we had to do for ourselves and our parents were always gone, right?
Right,
Like we were alone. We had to walk to school and stuff. We were alone a lot during that period. And now, safetyism and you want to take your kids to school or whatever, or maybe it's just a bigger community and you have to drive them now, or maybe it's that, technology has taken the place of boredom where,
Hmm.
when I was a kid, we were bored, so we went outside. And now you don't have to do that anymore. And it isn't
Yeah.
that one thing is necessarily better than the other, although I do think going outside is quite a bit better, physiologically speaking. But it's that natural, the natural forces that require us to stay sharp are kind of going
Mhm.
away because of technology.
Yeah,
And
I'd agree with that.
it's incumbent upon people, parents especially, but even in your own life, to make sure you're recreating some of those circumstances to make sure you're capable.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And how do you do that, right? I mean, you've raised children, but your kids are probably what, in their 30s and 40s?
No, I started late in life. My youngest is just turned 19
Oh, there
yesterday.
you go.
Yeah, but my daughters are 27 and just now 21. But yeah,
So they've
yeah.
they've they've come up in a time of technology then. So how have you handled that? I mean,
Oh,
you're
absolutely.
you're obviously a guy that does things the old way, if you want to say it that way. So how have you handled that?
I think you have to create a balance. I mean, they weren't allowed to have a cell phone till a certain age, and they weren't allowed to be on social media till a certain age, and even that was heavily monitored.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I remember, even coaching at TCU, and I was like, I didn't know anything about Facebook, and all of a sudden somebody said, "Well, hey, so and so made a post." I mean, I looked at them like they had a third head. Like, what the hell are you talking about? They made a post, and shortly after Facebook came out, and then I got on there, and I even noticed as an adult like how consuming that could be. And this was in its earlier stages. But yeah, I think just monitoring that, but keeping them focused and active on things that mattered, things that would pay off later for them. And a lot of that was rooted in activity and movement and, things they wanted to do, whether it be if they want to play soccer or the girls were in ballet or gymnastics. They kind of picked their poison, but our goal was to be as active in a multitude of things that they wanted to be in and not over inundated either. One really loved to play the guitar, the other loved to play the violin, but there was no pressure to be, you know, first chair. It was about just being well rounded and trying to be involved in what brought them joy.
Yeah. And this is kind of an age old thing between parents and kids. It's like kids are reluctant to do stuff or they have ideas and you're like, well, I don't know if I'll like that. Okay, yeah, you're right. You don't know if you'll like it, so go do it. If you don't like it, that's fine.
Yeah.
This is not new. It's not new to this generation. It's not new to humanity. I mean, it's been going on forever. So, finding ways to, keep the kids engaged and stuff like that is super important.
And we were
And
never in select sports either. I mean, I
yeah,
didn't do a select sport approach to things where, we weren't going to be that family that was, okay, we're coaching baseball and football year round, and you will do, privatized teams outside of the YMCA, for example. I mean, we didn't go that route. If uh, a couple of them got into pole vaulting, really loved it, but I could tell that no matter how much they put into it based off body type and size, that's a sports specific
mm,
activity. So there was going to be limitations, and try to prep them for that. Like, hey, kudos for you for trying to reach 13 feet, but it's probably not going to happen at your age and size. But just being realistic with them about that too, and not filling their heads full of fluff. I can't tell you how many parents would bring kids to me. I mean, we had over 500 clients at the gym, all of them kids, and a lot of mothers thinking, you got the next Mary Lou Retton on your hands. It's just like, nah, that's not really quite how this works.
yeah.
And the type of commitment that you've got to do for that is an entirely different game.
Yeah, I think if I think I have this number right. I think 2% of the people who play college football play in the NFL or something like that,
Right.
which
Something like that.
is
Yeah.
like that's the highest of all the sports that you play in college. That one is the one that's probably the most. That's probably the one that creates the most professional athletes, and it's still only 2%, and that's still at the
Yeah.
highest level, at the collegiate level, right? So,
Sure. Sure.
man, I mean, you know, there are a lot of parents out there that think their kids are going to be superstars, and I think it kind of defeats like playing youth sports, even individual sports, isn't necessarily about um, well, it's not even not necessarily. It's not about trying to produce professional athletes. That's not what that is. It's about teaching
Right.
lessons, right? And
Right.
now we don't teach those lessons, I guess, in a lot of ways because everybody wins, and you know, um, I'm not. I just don't see what the point is. Like if I was a kid these days, and I guess it's kind of hard to say because I would have been raised in that environment. But if I was a kid these days and everybody got the same trophy no matter what happened, I wouldn't fucking play. That's stupid.
Yeah. 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 And I think parents, for right or wrong, guide a lot of those
Mm.
decisions. And, like I said, with my own kids, it's just like, what's your interest? What do you want to do? And yeah, the one thing I've noticed too, though, as being a coach, is watching the burnout happen so much younger, or excuse, not younger, but so much quicker
Mm.
in younger athletes versus, gosh, when I was in high school, a lot of the athletes that were great at high school sports, they weren't sitting there necessarily looking at college and a career beyond that. They just really enjoyed the
Mm.
fact that they got to play for their team, right? And against the rivalry. And then you would see a few of the phenoms step up and become something really special and go on to college maybe. Once in a blue moon, somebody goes to the pros. And even I think now today, what the average for the NFL is about 3 years. That's if you're
Mm.
healthy. But I think there's a mindset that's changed with parents when it comes to youth sport training and what is sport. Like you said earlier, you said a mouthful. It really should be about the activity. Be becoming a well-rounded person, not necessarily, oh, I'm going to make my living off of this later in a professional setting.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to approach pretty much anything you do. To be honest, like
Yeah,
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 you can't. Something I really enjoy telling people a lot is that in life you can't control the outcome of things most of the time, but you can control your attitude and your effort. And
right,
that's what I don't know if you've read it before, but The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. That's kind of what it's about, right? It's about
right.
if you do the right thing on a long enough time frame, you're going to be successful. That's how it works, and it's true too. But
Yeah,
we get very impatient these days, and I don't know what that is. Is the impatience part of keeping up with the Joneses? Is it that we're more concerned about the finality of life, or I don't know what it is. There's so much pressure to succeed at a certain age, and the odd thing is about it is that it's had the reverse effect because people are getting
yeah.
jobs later, they're getting married and having kids later, and all this stuff. Like it's had completely opposite the effect that it was intended to have.
Yeah, it seems like it's a lot of the all of the above when you get to answer that question. That's a lot to unpack as to, what are the root causes of it. It's one of the things that I follow a great deal is Joseph Campbell and Dr. Peterson. I follow him quite a bit and read a lot of his stuff. But I think there's been such and it's rooted into our fabric of instant gratification, instant acceptance, instant expectation of success. That certainly is a mantra that seems to occur regularly today, and the misunderstanding of that it takes, it's really a marathon to get to where you need to be. It's not a sprint, and that goes for any business that I've ever started. Even the place I'm sitting in right now, we opened up this brew house. We did a Texas historic renovation on it. We're real proud of it. But 3 months after we opened, the world shut down with the pandemic. Okay, well, what now? How do we survive this? And crap, we started making hand sanitizer because there was a shortage of hand sanitizer. That kept us afloat for a year until we could get back to regular business. But I saw a lot of people that just didn't have that attitude. They just quit, or they stopped, or they went to the government tit or teat and depended on that. It's when we do talk about hard times too, I really watched my children very closely, as did many parents, during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
How we were handling school at that time and the pressures that were put on families and kids just because of governmental decisions made. But as a parent, I get to have a say in that. I get to have a say about how they react to it. a lot of that had to do with how we led them through the
Mm.
pandemic versus how the government led us through the pandemic.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot to what you stated. I mean, man, I wish I had all the answers as to
Mm.
why. You can certainly see a lot of the results of action. But I think too that, it gives me hope when I see, I got a lot of young hires here in our businesses locally, and we're in a small town. Population here is about 19,000. Where we were living out at the ranch, population of that town was about 300. And what I keep seeing that gives me hope is there's a lot of good work ethic still being pushed into kids, a lot of realistic expectations of how to live your life and how to be a good person. And Lord knows I fail at it constantly, but I try to keep pushing forward to be the right guy. But I've got a kid that's worked for me now going on 4 years, and he's about to graduate college and wants to go off into law enforcement, and those kind of things give me hope.
Mm.
When you ask somebody to go clean the restroom, they go grab the toilet brush and go do it. That
Mm.
gives me hope. And when I tell my son, hey, start your day by making your bed, and sit down and write down your affirmations of what you're going to do this week, and see him do it, that gives me hope. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of good out there still. We get so inundated with this media onslaught of just negativity. It's pretty easy to get into a downward spiral about how shitty things are.
Yeah, for sure.
I think things are probably better than we maybe realize.
I mean, honestly,
That-
for people like us, it's always better because if all this goes away, I'll just go back to doing what I was doing before. I don't give a shit.
Yeah. Yeah. Or something new.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm with you.
But it's it's interesting you say that because anytime I have conversations about how fucked things are, or how like the new generation of people and whatever, usually people will do what you just did, which is recount the entirety of the problem, but then point to specific examples of how it's also not true for individuals, right? And
Yeah.
it seems to me like the less in society, the less the individual is promoted, and the more the group, whatever the group happens to be, if it's this demographic or that, or all of society or community or whatever, the more the group is promoted, we create blockages, right? It's like having too many cars on a single highway. Everybody's trying to fit into the same mold, do the same thing. Everybody wants to get a tech job. Everybody wants to do this or that. And then we create blockages. And then, you see independent individual people become more and more successful in those environments because they're not, blocked out or boxed out by all this traffic, and it's,
Right.
I mean, that's, it makes sense, it's, and this is kind of the point of this show. It is, you can either accept the responsibilities required of you to secure your rights and you will be a citizen of this country, or you can allow somebody else to secure them for you and you will be a subject under rule. And the latter for me is completely unacceptable. And if you're an individual, especially when it comes to building your own life, then instead of having to travel on the highway that everybody else is and being stuck in traffic, you can make your own fucking road. You know what I mean? And I personally have done that and been very successful at it. And I don't think, look, it's stressful and it's difficult and you have to put in a lot of effort and there's a risk involved, but it wasn't like, I'm not Atlas. I'm not carrying the world on my shoulders. This is just a job. You know what I mean? It's just like anything else.
Perspective matters, and like of course, I'll mention my son here a lot, but I say the same thing to my daughters. There's nothing wrong with being independent.
Mm.
You don't have to follow the herd, and that could even be, if you're getting tapped out to be in a sorority or fraternity going into college. I've just always told them there's nothing wrong with being a GDI. Be a goddamn independent.
Mm.
You want to go join that group? Okay, fine, but still remember you have an independent quality to yourself, and it's really, always be alert, always be looking. Don't have your head down, have your head up, and that's really been my approach and mantra to my kids, and I think it's served them well. I've got my middle child right now. She, and I've told her you don't even have to go to college. You really don't. I think it can be a great experience and a great rounding out, but that degree matters as to what you're going to spend your time in. But, I've got a daughter that came to me after 2 years in college, said, hey, I've been offered a 1.5 year internship at a camp that they've been a part of since they were in their early years, like 6, 7 years old. She's now doing an outdoor education component. She's an education major, and she wanted to take a year off because she knew later she wouldn't be able to do this. Well, tear it up, go do it. I mean,
Mm,
they're paying her way through, and she's getting experiences and getting to meet people from other countries that come in throughout the year. And that makes it for a well-rounded person. And then after that, if you want to go back and finish or finish online, being an educator is one of those things. You just got to check the boxes and get
mm,
the work done. But it allows you to do so many other things. And I think that's what they're realizing, because my career path is a pretty strange one. I got on the job early, put in 20 years, got out, and then I really started my career. I
mm,
feel like, and it's been a bunch of independent um, uh, developments, whether it be buying real estate and selling it, or trying to start a business. I've had businesses fail. I've had them not make it, and okay, well, how do I dig out of that?
mm,
And what did I learn from it so I don't repeat the mistake? Or maybe it wasn't even a mistake; it was just the economy.
mm.
So they look. I think most of my kids thought I was in the mafia for many years, because I'd be gone on the weekends and come home. And that's back when I was doing the seminars. I started off doing one seminar a month. That turned into we were doing 10 seminars a month by the time that I finally retired from it, with a staff of 40 coaches globally. And I could be in Australia for 3 weeks and then back, or in Egypt for a weekend, then back, and staff just all over. So, they didn't really quite understand my job, but I told them, I said, hey, this is going to benefit our family. It's going to benefit you. And we get to help people. And plus, it was my passion. I love doing it.
Mm.
And so I think through action, they've seen what is possible versus like, oh, I've got to go work for somebody so that I'm creating passive income for them. There's a lot of jobs out there you get fulfillment from doing that. Don't get me wrong. I just tend to be a bit more independent in my thinking on what is a career, what is business, what is how do I want to recreate that account receivable, and do I enjoy it? And frankly, if I don't enjoy it, I really don't have a hard time walking away from it.
Yeah, that's a
And
good
I think
skill
that's
to
a hard
have.
lesson for a lot of people.
Learning how
Like
to
I'm
go ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to say it's really funny. A lot of the guys that I even worked with are just now kind of retiring, and I've met a few of them from time to time, and you know, we're all about the same age, but they look like they've worn out three bodies. And, some of them have been retired a couple of years and they fall over dead of a heart attack.
Mm.
So I look at that quality of life and I go, man, you really paid a price just to hang on to that position for 33 years,
Mm.
And that's kind of one other thing I tell my kids too. Just remember everything that you do has a price. Your time, the exchange of your time for what you're doing can be a price. So make sure it's something you really want to do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's interesting. It seems we've the first couple of years we were doing this, it was whether we're dealing with talking to our friends or going to the bank. They're like, "What do you do? What's your company?"
Yeah.
Like, "Well, we have
Right.
podcasts." And like,
Yeah.
"What do you mean you what the fuck is a podcast?" I'm like, and I give them like a brief explanation, but then you know, after a while, I was just like, yeah, it's just a media company. Here's our bank information. I don't want to have this
Right.
conversation again. You can see how profitable this is.
Right.
Now, to the point of the individual stuff, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about it. It's one that we deal with in the military a lot, where people have this idea that it's just a bunch of brainwashed followers and stuff like that. And, when you build teams, people think you're building a leader and then followers. But that's not how that
Mm.
works. Because if you do it that way, it's going to fail. The truth
Right.
is, you're building only leaders, right? You only spend your time on quality people who you know can lead because they may have to. And
Right.
everyone has to know what it means to lead. They have to have the skills to do that. Now, it's at different levels. Not everybody's going to be the president of a company. Not everybody's going to be a politician, that's not a leader really. That's more of just a piece of shit. Um, but not everybody's going to find themselves in an actual defined leadership position at some point in their life, other than maybe their family. But
Mm.
you do have to know how to lead in general, whether you're in a workplace or anywhere else, because psychology is contagious. You've built multiple teams at this point in your entrepreneurial career. You know how that goes. The
Yeah.
maintaining morale, making sure people, like, the best unit you could ever create are a bunch of people who know they can depend on each other, even if they don't know specifically what they're going to be doing. You can teach them that. But if they all know
Sure.
that they can depend on each other, then you can do pretty much anything with a team like that.
I agree, and I think frankly that's where people like you and I are in a minority, and to me that's been the struggle my whole life is because like on the fire department, it literally was that what you just analogized there. We were a team. We were all dependent. We could be self-dependent, but we could also work as a unit, and our lives depended on each other.
Mm.
Other people's lives depended on our actions, and even more so, I found that when I got into the law enforcement side of things, and taking apart bombs for a living, or uh, being an investigator and wearing a different hat than I had when I got on the job. And it was really neat too as I got older to see younger guys come up behind me and then be a part of it and see them grow, right? Especially when they would rise to the occasion. And all that does is just build, great confidence and ability, like you said, to be a leader. And there's lots of ways to lead, and obviously lots of definitions of what leadership is. But for me, it's about accountability. I mean, I've had officers that we didn't have a lot of confidence in, but we didn't cast them to the curb.
Mm.
We worked with them and worked under their command, and we made them look damn good doing our job really well. If you can put the ego aside, realize what the mission statement is, and the goal is, and plans of action to that goal. Um, the thing that I found amazing is when I got out of the profession and into the real world, I guess, and was basically a citizen and not a civil servant. That took about a 7 year transition for me. I just wasn't used to dealing with people who didn't have that level of commitment uh, to a goal. I remember I became an athletic advisor. When I retired, I went back to TCU and I was getting my graduate studies going there for history, and I was just shocked at how adults could act so badly.
Oh, you know,
And these
it's
are educators.
it is wild. So I actually did a story on this yesterday. Uh, 2/5, that which is to say 40% of millennials say their parents still pick up one or more of their monthly bills. 40%.
Wow.
Like
Wow.
17%, their parents are covering all or part of their mortgage. Another
Wow.
24%, they're paying some or all of their rent. And millennials, by the
Wow.
way, it's not Gen Z. It's 26 to 41 years old.
Wow.
So,
That's sad.
like, this is what I meant before when I said the things that we've been trying to do to help our kids have made them less prepared for life.
Yeah.
We've kept the training wheels on the tricycle for too long, right? That's what we've done here. And
Yeah.
the other part of what you said about leadership and stuff, or leaders rather, the best leaders I've had aren't necessarily. One of them was a West Point graduate, but not all of them are like service academy guys who are groomed to lead and then given a billet and put in charge of people. The best leaders, most of the best leaders I've ever had, are guys who are accountable, as you said, to
Yeah.
others, but also to themselves. Like, they hold themselves to a higher standard. You talked about your son, and I refuse to make my bed. I'm not going to do it. I just think it's completely pointless. But I do understand the point of it because I have my routine in the morning that I do every single day as well, and it's what gets me ready for the day. That's the point. And
Right.
the writing
Right.
down the affirmation stuff, like, hey, these are the things that I'm going to do this week. You're challenging
Right.
yourself. You're giving yourself no option to fail. That's the point
Yeah.
there. And
Yeah.
the guys that I'm talking about, they're 22 to 25 years old, who in the real world they would be a middling or underling employee somewhere, but instead they're in charge of a dozen or more dudes, and you're in combat, right? And these are some of the
Right.
best young leaders. I mean, think about the American Revolution. We're talking about guys who were 19 to 26 years old for the most part, except for a couple of dudes. Adams was a little bit older. Uh, uh,
Yeah.
uh, Benjamin Franklin was older, and Washington was older, but Lafayette was 24 years old. You know what I mean? Like these guys
Right.
were young.
Right. Yeah.
So
With a
it's
short lifespan too, as far as life expectancy back then,
sure.
I think that matters. I think mortality rates also have an effect.
Mm,
A lot of us think we're going to live a long time, and that's been kind of proven out obviously over time. But man, think about it back in the revolution, what they were dealing with as far as just life expectancy without battle,
mm.
disease, etc.
Smallpox and cholera in your teeth, right?
Yeah. But yeah, if you made it to old age, you really accomplished
Mm,
something like Jefferson and
mm,
Adams did. But no, I'm completely with you there, and my biggest thing too is like my even with my own children, it's like nothing's really handed to you. You've got to earn it. You've got to work for it, and it doesn't mean that I don't help my children. I do, but even if we're helping them, there's an expectation that there's a price for that. Meaning, for example, when my kids went to college, I said, "Look, your job now," because they would work part time.
mm,
They would either work part time for us or other people. And I said, okay, now that you're in college, your job is to make grades. If your expectation is to go be a ad PR person, okay, get it, go do it. But my expectation is if that's your goal, focus on it, get done quickly, get out, start your life. But your job is to make grades. Your job is not to work part time and try to go through college. So I said, I'll make a deal with you. I'll take care of college for you, but you better make grades. And if you don't, then you're going to be paying me for the college. Um, so, I've always tried to instill in them that there's a level of expectation that you've got to earn it. And if they got into an activity, it was the same thing. Nothing's going to be given to
mm.
you. You've got to earn your position on that team, on that sport. And if you don't, well, then we're going to assess why. And normally it would always fell back to them, their lack of commitment to it. So, we'd sit down and have the talk, and expectations would rise,
Yeah.
and they normally would meet that level.
It's a useful exercise to get the kid, or whether it's even an adult subordinate who you're managing, or an adult child, maybe, I guess, if you're giving them advice, but have them say out loud exactly what it is they want to accomplish. Then you can
Right.
that is your finish line. Okay, now let's work backwards and figure out how we can achieve these goals. People like I didn't do well in high school because my home life was kind of tumultuous and it was boring as shit, to be honest. But through college, through let's see, 10 years of college, I guess. Uh, I think my cumulative GPA was 397 because it was engaging. But it wasn't just like I didn't get smarter all of a sudden. What I did learn was that while I don't care, like the grades aren't a function of how smart you are, which is what I used to
Right.
think, right? I'm like, I'm smart enough to do this. I don't give a fuck about this. That's not what it is. It is about showing someone that you're capable of achieving excellence, right, on your own.
Mhm.
That's what it does. When somebody looks at your college transcripts and see that you have 2.5 GPA the whole time, they're like, this guy's gonna fucking phone it in most of the time.
Yeah.
Not, I don't like. I can see that he's smart. I'm having a conversation where he's a smart guy, but he's not going to work hard. That's not what hard
Right.
work. 2.5 is not what hard work looks like.
Right. Right. Well, and I kind of had the same experience. I don't know how many times I almost dropped out of high school. Just I'll go get a GED and
Mm,
move on. I never had an expectation to go to college. I didn't start college till I was age 29, and really only kind of did that because I started to become bored, and they gave firemen 50% off to go to the local college
mm,
that was there, that was just TCU, and but I fell in love with it, and fell in love with academia and study, and yeah, I had a whole different experience as far as what it meant to learn and study and research, and at one point thought about being a history professor. My problem was I just couldn't deal with the damn adults in the history department. I couldn't believe how childish they
mm.
were. And it's okay. Well, I'll just enjoy history and not have to worry about making it a profession.
Yeah,
But
I hear a lot of veterans that go because a lot of guys get out when they're in their late 20s or early 30s. Some of them get out in their mid 20s, which is whatever. But guys that do 10 years or more, or get out then and then they go back to college with a bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds. I hear
yeah,
them bitch and moan a lot about what's going on there. Like, all right, cool. Yeah, you're right. It is fucking stupid, but you are the person that knows better. So it's your responsibility to lead these people. Like
right.
if your response to that is just to bitch about it and make fun of them, then you're not a leader. We need leaders in this
You know,
country.
you brought that brings something to mind. I remember my first philosophy class. It was ethics of philosophy, and It was just basically talking about ethical
Mm,
situations. And I remember we went into this probably the third day of class. Guy walks in, the professor walks in. He says, "Okay, I've got his words exactly. He goes, I got a mongoloid baby. I'm the father of the baby. My wife just gave birth to it. I'm also a doctor. And when I see that the baby is a mongoloid child, I just take it and throw it to the ground and kill it."
mm,
And that began the conversation. And as you know, there was a whole gamut of reaction in the room, and most of the minds were young,
mm,
freshman, sophomore, barely out of high school into college, and it was an interesting conversation and to see their perspective. And I never said a word. I just sat in the back of class and really kind of took it all in and listened. Because there was a lot of weight about, well, he probably did the child a service, it was going to have a hard life, short life expectancy, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally the professor just kind of looked at me and said, "Well, Mr. Tucker, you're not saying anything." And I said, "Well, I've been kind of listening, but I'm just curious why nobody's called the cops yet, because we've just had a murder." And then that changed the whole
mm,
dynamic of the conversation. But that was, it didn't enter any of these kids' minds at that time that, hey, a crime has been committed here,
mm.
regardless of how we want to feel about it, you know, or justify or not justify the action. Um, you know, I just, that was kind of my whole experience from class to class. Uh, and I got to be really good friends with a lot of those
Mm.
professors that I kind of naysayed earlier, but I, I had a different experience because frankly I was 30 years old and back in
Yeah.
college, and but I sure got a hell of a lot out of it, even from listening and seeing other younger uh, students than me give their part to it. But yeah, that kind of brought on a while
Mm.
how that popped out of my head. But it certainly was a different world.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, it was different perspective back then. I think I started to lose hope back then a little bit, when I saw some of the reactions
Oh
of,
yeah.
of, of people going to college. But anyway,
Yeah,
sorry, I
well,
digress.
people, especially, well, it used to be mostly younger people, but now I guess it's not just that. But people react emotionally to things a lot.
Yeah,
They react emotionally and narrowly through the prism of their own experience most of the time.
yeah,
And
right,
it is easy to write people like that off. It's understandable that you would write somebody like that off and just roll your eyes like I'm not listening to this shit. But your job as a leader is not to write people off, it is to lead, right? So in the same way that you learn how to provide CPR or fireman carry somebody or teach your kid how to stay in the lane when he's driving or whatever, like this is your job, is to fucking figure out a
right,
way to make relationships with these people and pull them out of this stupid bullshit. Like, hey, I
yeah,
understand why you're doing this, but here's the better path and here's why it's the better path. What do you think about that? And have that conversation, because this is to me the defining problem for every crumbling society. It's that the people refuse to they're and maybe it's structurally, maybe it happens like this on purpose, where the aristocratic class pits everybody against each other so they stay fighting and don't realize what's going on. But it doesn't matter why it happens, it happens. The true seat of power in any civilization is whatever the people say it is. If they think it's the Pope, then it's the Pope. If they think it's the president, then it's the president. If they think it's something else, it's something else. If they think it's nothing, then it's chaos, right? So
right,
this has taken many forms over the years, as you know, as an historian. Uh, uh, but it's almost always a tenuous appeal to some sort of authority. Very rarely in society has it been that the ruling class actually had the ability to physically rule the mob, right? Because the mob is always so much larger. So we put
right,
our faith in these institutions, and that's fine, but we don't put our effort into them. As Plato said, if
yeah,
you don't take part in your own governance, you're doomed to be ruled by fools, right? And
sure,
this is where we find ourselves now. Uh, you
yeah,
know, it's the mob or whomever, the people will always outnumber whatever ruling class exists, whether it's a dictator or feudalist governors, the Congress in the United States, and there's no actual tangible power there. It's the power that we allow. And I tell people
yeah. It's
this,
perceived.
yeah, I tell people this because they feel hopeless. Like this problem has grown too large for us to fix. It's like, no, it hasn't. There's 500 people in Congress, right? 535 people. So
An extreme analogy. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you there, but I mean, an extreme analogy to that is look at Tiananmen Square. A lot of people don't really understand what happened in Tiananmen Square and how long that built up. But if you don't think China's leaders aren't concerned about their populace eventually pushing back against them, they're always worried about it. It is always in their daily thinking of how to be in control of their populace. And I recently read a book about Tiananmen Square and then watched a frontline documentary about it just to kind of see if they gelled together. And there were things in there that I just didn't even realize had happened. And, that even at some point, the students had weapons there. And when the Army was actually brought in for the first time, that they just said, we're not going to fight against our people. The second wave they brought them in from the peasant areas of the country and then indoctrinated them into what was happening before they were brought to the situation. So there'd be no question that they would fight against those that supposedly were doing the uprising and trying to take over the government, according to what they were told, right? But that perception is absolutely a reality. And you're spot on. I mean, we give far too much of our own freedoms and power and all for the sake of a politician who's probably not doing our bidding anyway.
Yeah, certainly not.
I hate to blanket all of them that way. I don't think, I think there are some good people in there that are trying to do the good work. But yeah, I mean, like right now, Putin he's got to be scared. Oh, yeah. I would imagine no matter what he puts out front, he's got to be worried, right?
Yeah, he's not.
He's made some bad moves.
I mean, look, Russia's never been particularly good at fighting wars. They're good.
Right.
They're good at intelligence, but not war so much. But yeah, it's to your point. It's like any authority is like Tinkerbell, right? It only exists if you believe it exists. If enough people believe it exists. And the problem is that a lot of folks just refuse for whatever reason, whether it's out of fear or they don't want to lose their mortgages, they don't want to lose their the convenience of their daily life, whatever it is. But they refuse to take part in this stuff. And it's like, if you're a conservative person out there talking about small government, there is only one way that will achieve that. Only one way. And that is to find problems that the federal government or state government is solving, and you go solve them yourself, right? Because as long as people are on that tit, then you're not going to have a confluence of power to fight back against these people. It just won't happen.
I agree.
That seems like, I agree with you. That seems like the most obvious thing in the world, doesn't it? Like think about it this way: if you're if you are a lieutenant at your station and one of your guys is being an asshole and some other lieutenant or a captain has to come over and correct that dude, that should piss you off. Not at the captain or lieutenant, but at your guy. Like, no, you should have been doing the right thing in the fucking first place. But the only reason that other asshole was able to come in and intervene in your situation is because we allowed it to happen. We let our shit get outside of our own breach.
I think it's funny too how right now, if we take our current government state, how people are so afraid to be uncomfortable and afraid to take on large topics for the sake of losing that comfort. Whether it be like you said, a job or a style of living or a level of living. There's just so much to risk, right? In so many people's minds. And to a point, I get that. But, at what point are you willing to push back and say, hey, look at future generations and what they're going to have to deal with just because of something like debt, right? The debt that we've incurred. We can get real into the weeds on this stuff, but just think of what term limits could do. What positive effect that could have if done correctly. Maybe they serve 6 years and they're out. I don't know. I don't know the full answer to it, but I do think career politicians have certainly found a way to take care of themselves over. It's not an e pluribus unum approach, and so they've taken care of themselves and lined them pockets. That's an issue for me,
Mhm.
when really it's supposed to be about service. I'm a real service oriented guy. That's how I was raised. My dad was a firefighter. He taught me to be a civil servant. But it doesn't mean that you give so much of yourself at the expense of your liberty, or you give so much of yourself at the expense of government for government's sake.
Mhm.
And it's hard for people, I think, to become comfortable knowing they might have to get real uncomfortable before it gets better. Uh, the media these days just really surprises me how we can create such a tempest in a teapot over a nothing issue, or go the opposite direction and take something like our border right now, which is in chaos, and basically bald faced lie about it not being in chaos. It's astonishing to me. But you got to get uncomfortable to fight that
Mhm.
border war. You got to get uncomfortable to do. I still get pissed off every time I think about the. Of course, I'm a horseman and I'm a cowboy, and I know those border agents were using that horse as a tool. They weren't whipping anybody. I mean, come on, and it blows me away the narrative that came from that, all the way from our president down to
Yeah.
Mayorkas and so on. Then you see later the email chain that comes out where everybody's enraged that
Mhm.
they're saying that they're whipping people coming across the border. That border could be so easily controlled. They just need to put the steps in it to do it. But it's so politically charged now. We've got an administration who's willing to allow a lot of people to suffer for the sake of politics. It's pretty sad. But the only way to fight that is to, I think, stand up and uh, get uncomfortable and worry about risking and state pieces that matter. Because it's pretty common to me. It's pretty common logic to fix that situation.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm not opposed to people coming into this country, but I'm damn sure opposed to seeing 200 plus thousand come across the border each month, and those are just the ones that we know about. I mean,
Mhm.
that has an impact on our society on multiple levels. But I'm sorry, I probably went down a rabbit hole there.
No, that's a good example that's pretty indicative of the overall problem, you know. Um,
But you got leaders in there that are not allowing. I mean, I know this just because I talked to a lot of the guys that will leave Camp Bowie and go down to the border and come back,
mhm.
and they're down there trying to do their job, or DPS agents who are local have been called down there, and really it's a lot of smoke and mirrors even on our state local side here in Texas. There could be larger actions taken, but for political sake, they're not taking them because they're also trying to still work with federal government and incentives that come from them. But man, there are people who you talk about leadership. There are people who are trying to step up and lead, and they're being snuffed out. They're being quieted. Um, I think it's going to reach a boiling point though, where maybe we're already there, but I think it's going to finally reach a boiling point where action is going to have to be taken. There's too much consequence happening right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, after in January of next year, after 3 years of the Biden administration, we're looking at 6 to 6.5 million people who have crossed the border and will never
Right.
leave. Right.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of
Right.
people. I mean, that's like
Yeah.
5% of the population basically has just leaked over. But yeah, it's a good point about even the state and local governments. Um, the same thing that happens with individuals where they don't want to sacrifice the convenience of life or they don't want to take any risks, so they accept the bullshit. Um, the Texas state government here has, because they don't want to they don't want to lose other federal programs, right?
Right.
They have
Right.
allowed our border to be overrun. That is weak cowardice
Great.
bullshit to me. Like
Yep.
right is right. That's the end of the fucking story. There's no negotiating as far as that goes for me. And if the federal government is trying to leverage other stuff over your head, call their bluff. Like
Yeah.
if we had a strong leader in office, if our governor was strong and our attorney general was strong, they would tell the federal government to go fuck themselves. Like, hey, if you think you're
Yeah.
going to withhold Medicaid and Medicare from our citizens because we're going to secure our own border, which you're not doing, good luck with that. Go ahead, right? Call their
Yeah.
bluff. Be willing to take the risk. Otherwise, they're just going to keep exercising power over us and then assuming more power over us because they know we're weak.
Yeah. I mean, and we're being bullied, honestly, by the federal government on that side of it. I do think there are some strong voices coming up. I mean, Dan Crenshaw, I've met and talked with a few times down there in Austin, and I like his style, but he's just one guy. I think that though the more of those voices we hear, and you're starting to see the end result of effect of these years of just opening that border and what's occurring, even if it's up in, I do think it's a clever thing that Abbott has shipped some people to different locales so that they can deal with it. I guarantee you, New York's not happy right now. West Virginia's not happy right now.
No, they're actually New York has been complaining to the federal government that their issues are
Yeah,
bad now. Like, okay, cool, come to El Paso, dude.
yeah. Well, our screw El Paso, come down to Eagle Pass.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but I'm with you there, but I do think that at least we've got some media outlets that are willing to put it out there
Mm.
on a daily basis. You're starting to see pushback from the Democratic side of it. I just hate that it's so politically charged. It doesn't have to be. It's a real common sense approach here to fix these things. But it's going to take the right voices and enough of them. The loudest voice seems to be the squeaky wheel that gets the grease, and that seems to be finally happening. But at what cost? How long did it go on? Like you stated your stat, over 6 million people. Yeah, they're not going to, and those are the ones we know about. We don't know how many were not caught that are in the system, and they'll be found out over time. But if you don't allow ICE agents to do their job, why the hell have the damn administration?
That's a good question.
ICE? Astonishing.
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate your time today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we get out of here?
No, listen, I just really appreciate the opportunity, and man, if there's any way I can ever be of service to you, let me know.
Yes, sir. I will. Tell everybody where they can find all your entrepreneurial stuff.
Oh man, you can go to teddysbrewhouse.com if you want. We just man, we have a lot of fun, make beer, and have a good time, and yeah, that's all. And I got nothing to promote.
There
I'm
we
just a
go.
regular Joe.
Teddy's Brew House you can promote. Next time I'm up there, I'll come by.
Man, dude, we'll cook a steak for you and have
Oh,
a
yeah.
beer, and I really appreciate it, man. If I can do anything for you, let me know.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thank you for coming today. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you all watching and listening. This has been Citizen.